We are taking a step into a future that few have ever been privileged to take. We will go very slowly, very deeply. The work will be not only the lines, but the definitions of the words, the pronunciation of words, and the deepest understanding of things from Sri Aurobindo and Mother. So I will begin. It was the hour before the gods awake. Now, what is this hour? This hour, well, it's just before the creation. It's the hour before the creation. And who are these gods? These gods awake, before the gods awake. The gods are aspects of the Purushottama, of the Ishvara. Now, Savitri is written in iambic pentameter. So pentameter is 5 beats, and an iamb is a type of beat, short, long. It was the hour before the gods awake. Now, you would go to sleep if you pronounced it like that for too long, but we have to keep in mind this rhythm, this extraordinary rhythm of Savitri. All the great epics have been written in iambic pentameter. Homer, Virgil, all of them, Milton. So Sri Aurobindo has honored that. He has also honored the form that he doesn't begin at the beginning. The beginning of Savitri begins with book 4. That's when she's born. So he is leading us into it by sharing with us the creation. Across the path of the divine event, the huge foreboding mind of night, alone, in her unlit temple of eternity, lay stretched immobile upon silence marge. What is this divine event? He capitalizes the E. E-cap. I'll often tell you about capitalization because it's very important in Savitri. The divine event is the creation of life. The huge foreboding mind of night. What is foreboding? Well, it's kind of indicating beforehand. It's a kind of inner feeling or notion of some future presentiment. Very often it's used in a pejorative sense, quite negative. There was a foreboding feeling about this group or something like that, but not here. It's a kind of foretelling or predicting feeling. So the huge foreboding mind of night, alone in her unlit temple of eternity. Well, he calls night, he says that night has this unlit temple of eternity. And night is laying stretched out, immobile, not moving at all, upon silence marge, upon the edge of silence. Night, capital N. What is night? Sri Aurobindo, 2 quotes from the letters on yoga. The night is the symbol of the ignorance, or avidya. in which men live, just as light is the symbol of truth and knowledge. And then he has another quote from Letters on Yoga. In the way that one treads with the greater light above, even every difficulty gives its help and has its value. And now this most important end of this sentence. And night itself carries in it the burden of the light that has to be. So night is carrying in itself the burden of the light that is going to come down. And we're going to see as we move along here, there's so much to share. And we won't go very quickly, but you can ask questions if you like also. Now, he says that night has lay stretched immobile, or immobile as you wish, upon silence marge. He capitalizes silence. What does he call silence? Again, from the Letters on Yoga, he has at least 4 quotes. This is very important for us to know because in this yoga, silence is critical. Silence is a state in which either there is no movement of the mind or vital, or else a great stillness, which no surface movement can pierce or alter. Silence is the absence of all motion of thought or other vibration of activity. Then again, similarly, in complete silence, there are either no thoughts, or thoughts come, but they are felt as something coming from outside and not disturbing the silence. It is on the silence behind the cosmos that all the movement of the universe is supported. Further, he says, it is from the silence that peace comes. When the peace deepens and deepens, it becomes more and more silence. Marge. What is a marge? A marge is a margin, an edge. It can be material or immaterial, but here he's speaking of night lay stretched immobile upon silence marge. Now look at the word silence. It has a mark after it, and that means that you don't pronounce an S. Silence marge, but you understand it as plural. Silence marge, the apostrophe. Almost one felt, opaque, impenetrable, in the somber symbol of her eyeless muse, the abysm of the unbodied infinite. He doesn't say definitely one felt this. He says almost one felt. Almost one felt. What did one almost feel? Something opaque, something impenetrable, something like an abysm, a great cleft, a great abyss, in the somber symbol of her eyeless muse, the abysm of the unbodied infinite. And then he continues on, a fathomless zero occupied the world. Now, there's a lot to go over here. And I hope you will bear with me because the deeper we can go into Savitri, the more we will receive from Sri Aurobindo. And I'll tell you a little about how I have done this. I have met with the great sadhaks and sadhikas of the integral yoga. I have asked Nolini, Purani, Aurobindo Basu, Madhav Pandit, Alok Pandey, Jumur, and Temi to give me their interpretations of some of these lines. And they have been very, very generous. So we have now almost one felt, opaque, impenetrable, in the somber symbol of her eyeless muse. Look at the alliteration here. Somber, symbol, muse. Now, what is somber? Dim, gloomy, shadowy. Eyeless. Now, eyeless is normally understood without eyes, or blind, or sightless. But what Alok tells me is that it is not just a state of blindness from which one can recover, but a state where the very possibility of seeing is not there, either because it is not yet born. So this eyeless muse, Temi says, without the faculty of sight, not merely blind. In the somber symbol of her eyeless muse, the abysm of the unbodied infinite. Now, once again, Sri Aurobindo capitalizes the I. And I'm going to read from Mother and Sri Aurobindo about the infinite, because it is a key word in the integral yoga. From the Life Divine. The infinite is not a sum of things. It is that, capital S, which is all things and more. And then in Essays Divine and Human, he says, even the words eternal and infinite are only symbolic expressions through which the mind feels, without grasping, some vague impression of this supreme. Now, the mother speaks to a young person and she says, it is very simple, as you will see. The infinite is the inexhaustible storehouse of forces. The individual is a battery, a storage cell, which runs down after use. Consecration is the wire that connects the individual battery to the infinite reserve of forces. And then she has a second definition that she gives. The infinite is the river that flows without cease. The individual is the little pond that dries up slowly in the sun. Consecration is the canal that connects the river to the pond and prevents the pond from drying up. How simply Mother puts it, so beautifully. A fathomless zero occupied the world. A power of fallen, boundless self, awake between the first and the last nothingness, recalling the tenebrous womb from which it came, turned from the insoluble mystery of birth and the tardy process of mortality, and longed to reach its end in vacant naught. So we are seeing that this zero, which occupies the world, there is in it a power, but no capital P here for power, lowercase, a power of fallen, boundless self awake. Awake between what? Between the first and the last nothingness. And it is recalling the tenebrous womb from which it came, tenebrous, dark, and gloomy. Turned from the insoluble mystery of birth and the tardy process of mortality, and longed to reach its end in vacant naught. Capital N on naught. Naught is non-existence, nothingness. So we see that it is a power, but it is a power of fallen, boundless self, and yet it's awake. But it's awake between the first and the last nothingness. Now we have to remember that everything is dark. There is no light yet, none at all. This is absolute darkness. Recalling this power is recalling the tenebrous womb from which it came. And then it turns from this insoluble mystery of birth, because the mystery of birth is insoluble. We don't know why it came until we begin to read Sri Aurobindo, who tells us that birth is a result of the involution of the divine coming down and the evolution of the earth rising up. Man is not here yet. Turned from the insoluble mystery of birth and the tardy process of mortality, and longed to reach its end in vacant naught. Well, it doesn't want light. It doesn't want creation. It just wants to reach its end in vacant naught, in empty naught. So from that point, he begins and tells us, as in a dark beginning of all things, a mute, featureless semblance of the unknown, repeating forever the unconscious act, prolonging forever the unseeing will, cradled the cosmic drowse of ignorant force, whose moved creative slumber kindles the suns and carries our lives in its somnambulist whirl. Lot to go through here. As in a dark beginning of all things. Well, we will see about this dark beginning as Sri Aurobindo goes on and on in this first canto and tells us of the resistance of the darkness for light. So we have this mute, featureless semblance of the unknown, capital U. And Sri Aurobindo tells us in the Life Divine, the unknown is not the unknowable. It need not remain the unknown for us unless we choose ignorance or persist in our first limitations. For to all things that are not unknowable, all things in the universe, there correspond in that universe faculties which can take cognizance of them. And in man, the microcosm, these faculties are always existent and at a certain stage capable of development. We may choose not to develop them. Where they are partly developed, we may discourage and impose on them a kind of atrophy. But fundamentally, very key here, all possible knowledge is knowledge within the power of humanity. Extraordinary. A mute, silent, huh? Featureless, no features whatsoever. Semblance, a semblance, it looks a bit like this, of the unknown. What is that thing doing? It's repeating forever the unconscious act, prolonging forever the unseeing will. Look what he says, unconscious, unseeing. But it also cradled the cosmic drowse of ignorant force. Force, of course, is Prakriti. And force is the creatrix of all life. The Purusha stands behind, motionless, but he supports Prakriti in all her work. And Prakriti for us is nature, the work of nature. Nature destroys every moment and she rebuilds every moment. She's always experimenting and she's enjoying that experiment. The dinosaurs had their time and now they're gone. And now we have other things that are happening. We have the internet now. So all of these things are very important and we must spend a little time on the word force. Because force in the integral yoga is extremely important. First of all, Sri Aurobindo says in the hymns to the mystic fire, force is nothing but the power of being in motion. In the Life Divine, he writes, all phenomenal existence resolves itself into force, into a movement of energy that assumes more or less material, more or less gross or subtle forms for self-presentation to its own experience. So, phenomenal existence, that's us. And we are involved in this force. Force is the essential Shakti. Energy is the working drive of the force, its active dynamism. Power is the capacity born of the force. Letters on Yoga. I could spend the whole evening just sharing with you all he has written on force, because I went through all of his books, 34 of them and more, to find relevant passages for Savitri, for us. He says, matter is only substance form of force. Science agrees. Science has finally come to that. And now science is even saying there is a consciousness. Imagine. Repeating forever the unconscious act, prolonging forever the unseeing will, cradled this, like a child in a cradle, cradled the cosmic drowse, the cosmic sleep of ignorant force, whose moved creative slumber kindles the suns. We have the vision of Virat, which will come towards the end of Savitri, who lights his campfires in the suns. What an incredible line. Virat, who lights his campfires in the suns. So, this moved creative slumber kindles the suns, kindles them, just begins to light them up, and carries our lives, our human lives, in its somnambulist world. Well, we know somnambulism is sleepwalking. And that's what most of us do. We're not aware of it, but we are sleepwalking through much of our life. There are high moments, there's no doubt. But in general, the mass of humanity is sleepwalking. Now he continues on. What is a whirl? A whirl is a revolving movement like that. So it's a sleeping whirl that carries our lives. But it is a whirl that is always evolving upwards. Always upwards. It's evolutionary. Okay. Athwart the vain, enormous trance of space, its formless stupor without mind or life, a shadow spinning through a soulless void, thrown back once more into unthinking dreams, earth wheeled abandoned in the hollow gulfs, forgetful of her spirit and her fate. Oh, now he brings in earth. There's total darkness here. There's no light at all. And let's go through it very carefully. Athwart. Can someone tell me what athwart means? Moving from side to side. Across, crosswise or transversely. Against the proper or expected course, which would be straight or vertical, it moves this way. So this vain, enormous trance of space has a formless stupor. Stupor is inertia, suspended sensibility. So it's formless stupor. There's no mind here yet. There's no life here yet. Everything is, we have to remember, is a zero. The mind of night. And what else is it? It's a shadow spinning through a soulless void. Look at the alliteration. Shadow, spinning, soulless. Yeah, all this is mantra, remember. All mantra. Thrown back once more into unthinking dreams. This gives us a hint that there may have been evolutions prior to this. Thrown back once more into unthinking dreams, earth wheeled, abandoned in the hollow gulfs. So we had the whirl, now we have the wheeling, forgetful of her spirit and her fate. Then something is going to happen now that is so extraordinary, so vast. But first he tells us the impassive skies were neutral, empty, still. Then something in the inscrutable darkness stirred, a nameless movement, an unthought idea. And before I go further, we have to go through some words. We have a shadow spinning through a soulless void. What is this void? In his letters on yoga, Sri Aurobindo tells us the void is the condition of the self, free, wide, silent. It seems void to the mind, but in reality, it is simply a state of pure existence and consciousness. Sat and Chit with Shanti. Then he says in Letters on Yoga again, by void is meant emptiness clear of all contents except existence, pure and simple. Without that, one cannot realize the silent Brahman. So we have a shadow spinning through a soulless void. We have a formless stupor without mind or life. All these things are happening. Earth is wheeling abandoned in the hollow gulfs. She's forgetful of her spirit and her fate. What about the skies? The impassive skies were neutral, empty, still. Then something in the inscrutable darkness stirred. A nameless movement, an unthought idea. And idea again is capitalized. Idea in Sri Aurobindo's yoga often is synonymous with real idea or the supermind. Very, very important word. He says the idea is the realization of a truth in consciousness, as the fact is its realization in power. And in the supramental manifestation, he writes, the idea is not a reflection of the external fact, which it so much exceeds. Rather, the fact is only a partial reflection of the idea which created it. The view, and I have to read this, it's a little long, but I must share this with you. From the Life Divine. The view I am presenting, very rarely Sri Aurobindo uses the first person. Usually it's always we, but here he says I. The view I am presenting goes farther in idealism. It sees the creative idea as real idea, hyphenated word, real idea. That is to say, a power of conscious force expressive of real being, born out of real being and partaking of its nature, and neither a child of the void nor a weaver of fictions. It is conscious reality throwing itself into mutable forms of its own imperishable and immutable substance. The world is therefore not a figment of conception in the universal mind, but a conscious birth of that which is beyond mind into forms of itself. That is why Sri Aurobindo and Mother have said, there must be created a life divine on this earth. No other yogi, no other avatar, not even in the Gita, has even hinted of bringing down all that has been realized from those highest planes of the supermind and creating a life divine on earth. We are so privileged to be here at this juncture where it never happened before. It could only happen because they brought down the supramental. Don't forget, Sri Aurobindo left his body in 1950. And for 23 years after that, Mother worked on what? On the physical body. Mother was not touched by pain. It was the physical body that was going through the pain. And Mother was working on that body and the cells of that body, and she discovered a mind of the cells. Have you read that book, The Mind of the Cells? It's an extraordinary work in which Mother talks to Satsang of all that she has experienced. It's not easily available, but I recommend that you read The Mind of the Cells. Consciousness. Is it Adventure of Consciousness? No, it's a separate book. Now, The Adventure of Consciousness, I'm glad you brought it up, Uma, because that is the book that most of us Westerners grew up on. learning Sri Aurobindo. Mother said that Sri Aurobindo stood right behind Sat Prem as he wrote that book and put the words into him. I would recommend those two books very strongly. They are an essential overview of the integral yoga. Now, in Supermind Being, consciousness of knowledge and consciousness of will are not divided as they seem to be in our mental operations. They are a trinity, one movement with three effective aspects. Each has its own effect. Being gives the effect of substance. Consciousness, the effect of knowledge, of the self-guiding and shaping idea, of comprehension and apprehension. Will gives the effect of self-fulfilling. So we have three things here, right? We have three aspects of the supermind being. We have being giving the effect of substance, consciousness, the effect of knowledge, and will, the effect of self-fulfilling force. There is so much that I would like to read to you of all these definitions I have found in all their works, but time is passing and I would like to ask someone to read what we have just been through. Okay, I'll read it. It was the hour before the gods awake. Across the path of the divine event, the huge foreboding mind of night, alone in her unlit temple of eternity, lay stretched immobile upon silence march. Almost one felt opaque, impenetrable, in the somber symbol of her eyeless muse, the abysm of the unbodied infinite. A fathomless zero occupied the world. A power of fallen, boundless self, awake between the first and the last nothingness, recalling the tenebrous womb from which it came, turned from the insoluble mystery of birth and the tardy process of mortality, and longed to reach its end in vacant naught. As in a dark beginning of all things, a mute, featureless semblance of the unknown, repeating forever the unconscious act, prolonging forever the unseeing will, cradled the cosmic drowse of ignorant force, whose moved creative slumber kindles the suns and carries our lives in its somnambulist whirl. Athwart the vain, enormous trance of space, its formless stupor without mind or life, a shadow spinning through a soulless void, thrown back once more into unthinking dreams. Earth wheeled abandoned in the hollow gulfs, forgetful of her spirit and her fate. The impassive skies were neutral, empty, still. And then what happens? Then something in the inscrutable darkness stirred, a nameless movement, an unthought idea, insistent, dissatisfied, without a name. It is that important. It is so important to us to read Savitri, because when we begin to read it, even without understanding a line, it doesn't matter. It's going directly into our consciousness, above the head and through the heart. Mother says, don't try to understand it. She says, it will make itself known on repeated readings. And this is why we should always read Savitri aloud, because the mantra comes into being when we read it aloud. If we read it silently to ourselves, we lose the mantric effect. It's still so beautiful, but I would suggest that you read it aloud. So we did get through about a page, or maybe not quite a page, I don't know. Next week, we continue on. Good, good. Thank you all. Namaste. Namaste.